The Golden Hour in Buckhead. The 9th of May 2022. Buckhead, Atlanta. To the outside world, this is the Beverly Hills of the South, an enclave of manicured lawns, high-end boutiques, and multi-million-dollar mansions. It is a place where wealth is not just possessed, but performed. Among its most famous residents was Jeffrey Williams, known to millions across the globe as Young Thug. A fashion icon, a musical pioneer, and the head of the powerhouse label YSL Records, Williams was the embodiment of the American dream. He had risen from the crushing poverty of the Jonesboro South projects to become a titan of industry. But on this humid Monday evening, the veneer of celebrity was about to be shattered by the cold steel of a police tactical unit. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, a convoy of unmarked vehicles and Fulton County Sheriff's Department cruisers tightened a perimeter around Williams' residence. This wasn't a routine welfare check or a response to a noise complaint. This was the culmination of a multi-year, multi-agency investigation. When the tactical teams moved in, they weren't just looking for drugs or guns. They were there to dismantle an empire. Inside the mansion, the man who had redefined the sound of modern hip-hop was taken into custody without incident. But while Williams was being led away in handcuffs, a 56-count, 88-page grand jury indictment was being unsealed at the Fulton County Courthouse. It was a document that would send shockwaves through the music industry and ignite one of the most controversial legal battles in Georgia's history. The charge? A violation of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, better known as RICO. The two faces of YSL. To the fans who streamed his music and the executives at 300 Entertainment, YSL stood for Young Stoner Life, a successful record label, a creative collective, and a brand synonymous with Pushin' P and avant-garde fashion. It was a beacon of black excellence and entrepreneurial success. However, according to District Attorney Fani Willis and her team of prosecutors, YSL had a second, darker identity: Young Slime Life. The prosecution's argument was as bold as it was devastating. They alleged that YSL was not just a music label, but a violent criminal street gang affiliated with the National Blood Set. They claimed that since its inception in 2012, YSL had operated under the guise of legitimate business to commit a litany of crimes, including murder, armed robbery, and drug trafficking. The indictment didn't just target Jeffrey Williams. It named 28 associates, including fellow rap superstar Gunna Sergio Kitchens and Williams' own brother, Unfunk. The message from the district attorney's office was clear: no amount of fame, no number of Grammy nominations, and no level of community influence would provide immunity from the law. The RICO hammer. To understand the gravity of this case, one must understand the RICO Act. Originally designed to take down mafia bosses who insulated themselves from the dirty work of their soldiers, RICO allows prosecutors to hold the leaders of an organization responsible for the crimes committed by its members in furtherance of the enterprise. In the eyes of the state, Jeffrey Williams was the dawn of YSL. He was the one who provided the funding, the prestige, and the orders. The prosecution pointed to social media posts, hand signals, and most controversially, lyrics, as evidence of this criminal conspiracy. It doesn't matter what your notoriety is, Fani Willis stated in a press conference that gripped the nation. If you come into my county and you commit crimes, you are going to become a target. But the defense, led by the formidable Brian Steele, saw it differently. They argued that the state was criminalizing success. They contended that Young Thug was a victim of his own lyrics, a man who used his platform to provide a way out for his friends and family, only to have his generosity and artistic expression used against him by a system that failed to understand the nuances of urban culture. A community divided. As the news of the arrest spread, Atlanta became a city divided. On one side were those who applauded the crackdown on gang violence, citing a rise in homicides and street-level crime that had plagued the city's south side. For them, YSL was a menace that had terrorized neighborhoods for a decade. On the other side was a massive wave of support for thugger, high-profile artists like Drake, Travis Scott, and Kanye West utilized their social media platforms to call for his release. Fans argued that the prosecution was an attack on black art and the First Amendment. The hashtag #FreeThug became a global rallying cry, painting Williams as a political prisoner rather than a criminal mastermind. But while the public debated the ethics of the case, Jeffrey Williams was being transported to the Fulton County Jail, a facility notorious for its overcrowding and violence. For the man who had spent the last decade flying on private jets and sitting front row at Paris Fashion Week, the reality of a 6x9 cell was a catastrophic fall from grace. The long road ahead. The initial hearings were a grim preview of the legal marathon to come. Young Thug was repeatedly denied bond, with Judge Ural Glanville citing him as a danger to the community and a flight risk. The court expressed concerns about witness intimidation, painting a picture of a man whose influence was so great that even behind bars, he could reach out and touch anyone in the city. The stage was set for a trial of unprecedented scale. 28 defendants, hundreds of witnesses, and thousands of pages of evidence. The prosecution was preparing to prove that the music was a front for the mayhem. The defense was preparing to prove that the state was chasing a ghost. What neither side knew at the time was that this case would not be measured in weeks or months, but in years. It would become a saga of judicial scandals, secret meetings, and a level of courtroom drama that surpassed any fiction. The jury deadlock. If the raid on Jeffrey Williams' mansion was a sprint, the trial that followed was a grueling, agonizing marathon that seemed destined to collapse under its own weight. In the legal world, justice is often slow, but in the case of the state of Georgia versus Jeffrey Williams et al., the wheels of justice didn't just grind slowly, they appeared to be stuck in the mud. The process of jury selection, usually a matter of days or weeks, stretched into a staggering 10 months. It became a record-breaking exercise in futility. Potential jurors were terrified of the YSL name, fearing retaliation from a gang the prosecution described as ruthless. Others simply couldn't afford to walk away from their lives for a trial estimated to last a year. Hundreds were summoned. Hundreds were excused. By the time the final 12 were seated in November 2023, the atmosphere in the courtroom was already thick with exhaustion and animosity. Truly humble under God. When the trial finally commenced on the 27th of November 2023, all eyes were on Brian Steele, the lead defense attorney for Young Thug. Steele knew he wasn't just fighting a legal case, he was fighting a cultural war. The prosecution had painted his client as a bloodthirsty gang leader who used music to celebrate his crimes. Steele's counteroffensive was nothing short of cinematic. In an opening statement that went viral globally, Steele attempted to rebrand the very identity of his client. He told the jury that Thug was not a threat, but an acronym for truly humble under God. He claimed that YSL was a tribute to the luxury fashion house Yves Saint Laurent, not a street gang. Even the hit song Pushin' P was reinterpreted as pushing positivity. To the prosecution, this was a cynical manipulation of the truth. To the defense, it was a necessary defense against a state that refused to see the difference between a rap persona and a private citizen. The trial became a battleground for the First Amendment, raising a haunting question. Can an artist's lyrics be used to imprison them? The courtroom circus. As the months rolled on, the dignity of the courtroom was repeatedly compromised by events that seemed ripped from a Hollywood script. In January 2023, while the jury selection was still underway, a co-defendant named Khalif Adams allegedly handed young Thug a Percocet pill in open court, an exchange captured on surveillance video. It was a brazen act of defiance that forced Judge Ural Glanville to tighten security to unprecedented levels. Then came the violence. In December 2023, Shannon Stillwell, known as SB, one of the key defendants remaining in the trial, was stabbed multiple times in the Fulton County Jail. The trial had to be paused as Stillwell fought for his life in a hospital. The incident underscored the prosecution's claim that the world of YSL was inherently violent, while the defense argued it proved the state could not even guarantee the safety of those in its custody. The secret meeting and the downfall of Judge Glanville. However, the most explosive moment of the trial didn't involve a gang member, but the man on the bench himself. On the 10th of June 2024, Brian Steele dropped a legal bombshell. He revealed that he had learned of an ex parte private meeting between Judge Glanville, the prosecutors, and a key state witness, Kenneth Lil Woody Copeland. Lil Woody, a man whose testimony was central to the state's case, had been reluctant to speak. Steele alleged that the judge and the DA's office had pressured Woody behind closed doors, outside the presence of the defense, a move that fundamentally violates the right to a fair trial. When Steele refused to reveal his source for this information, Judge Glanville, in a fit of rage, held the prominent defense attorney in contempt and ordered him to be taken into custody. The image of Brian Steele being led away by deputies, while still advocating for his client, became the defining image of the trial. The Georgia Supreme Court eventually intervened, granting Steele bond, but the damage to Judge Glanville's impartiality was done. In July 2024, Glanville was officially recused from the case, a rotating bench. The removal of the lead judge threw the longest trial in Georgia history into a state of total limbo. Judge Shukura L. Ingram was appointed to take over, but her tenure lasted exactly 2 days. She was forced to recuse herself after discovering that one of her former courthouse deputies had been arrested for an inappropriate relationship with one of the YSL co-defendants. Finally, the case landed on the desk of Judge Paige Reese Whitaker. She inherited a legal mess of historic proportions. Whitaker was tasked with cleaning up the procedural wreckage left behind by her predecessors, dealing with a frustrated jury, and managing a prosecution team that was increasingly accused of misconduct and disorganization. By the end of this phase, the YSL trial had become more than a criminal case. It was a symbol of a legal system on the brink of collapse. The King of Atlanta remained in his cell. The witnesses were terrified, and the millions of dollars in taxpayer money continued to burn as the world watched the most chaotic trial in modern American history. The domino effect and the cracking of the family. In the world of YSL, family isn't just a word, it's a blood oath. But when faced with the cold concrete walls of Fulton County Jail and an indictment that could lead to life in prison, loyalty began to fracture. This stage of the case saw a wave of plea deals that completely reshaped the battlefield, turning brothers in arms into witnesses against one another. The first domino to fall was Sergio Kitchens, known to the world as Gunna. In December 2022, Gunna accepted an Alford plea. Legally, he did not admit guilt but conceded that prosecutors had enough evidence to convict him. He walked free, but at the cost of his reputation. A courtroom video showing Gunna acknowledging that YSL is a gang and must end spread across the internet like wildfire. Atlanta's streets and the hip-hop community erupted. Accusations of snitching flooded Gunna. Although his lawyers insisted that his statement could not be used against Young Thug, psychologically, it was a dagger to the remaining defendants. After Gunna, other key figures, including Slime Life Shawty and even Thug's own brother, Unfunk, took plea deals. Young Thug slowly became the last remaining fortress. The battle of the unruly witnesses. As the trial dragged on, the Fulton County prosecutor's strategy revealed fatal weaknesses. They relied heavily on witnesses with deep criminal histories, an approach that backfired spectacularly. The most dramatic example was Kenneth Lil Woody Copeland. Woody became a nightmare for prosecutors the moment he took the stand. Instead of delivering the damning testimony they expected, he repeatedly answered, "I don't recall," denied the statements he had made on previously recorded tapes, and openly clashed with prosecutor Adrienne Love. Woody even admitted he had lied to police for years simply to avoid charges. This planted a giant seed of doubt in the jurors' minds. If the state's star witness is a self-admitted liar, how can the indictment be trusted? The prosecution's breakdown and Judge Whitaker's authority. When Judge Paige Reese Whitaker inherited the case from her overwhelmed predecessor, she quickly recognized the prosecution's mismanagement. Lead prosecutor Adrienne Love was repeatedly reprimanded for procedural errors, withholding evidence, and deliberately obstructing the defense. In a bombshell moment in September 2024, Judge Whitaker publicly criticized Love as disorganized and mishandling witnesses. The judge even considered declaring a mistrial due to the state's repeated misconduct. Pressure mounted on both sides. The prosecution realized their case had grown dangerously unstable after more than 2 grueling years. Young Thug's team celebrated small victories in court, but he had already spent over 900 days incarcerated without bond. His physical and mental health had deteriorated severely. A compromise increasingly looked like the only realistic exit for a case that had spiraled far beyond its original scope, the end of an era. By late October 2024, the final dominoes began falling. One by one, Quamarvius Nichols, Marquavius Huey, and Rodalius Ryan accepted last-minute plea deals. The courtroom door seemed to be closing around Jeffrey Williams. The battle was no longer about right or wrong, but about who would be the last man left behind bars. All eyes turned to Halloween Day 2024, the day Young Thug's fate would be decided not by a jury, but by a single decision that could reshape the legal history of Georgia. The Halloween Miracle. The 31st of October 2024. While the streets of Atlanta were preparing for trick-or-treaters, the atmosphere inside the Fulton County Courthouse was anything but festive. After more than 900 days in custody and a trial that had descended into a procedural nightmare, the King of Atlanta was at a crossroads. The state's case was crumbling, but the risk of a jury conviction still carried the weight of a life sentence. In a move that stunned the gallery, Jeffrey Williams entered a non-negotiated plea. This was a high-stakes gamble. He would plead guilty to the charges, but instead of a prearranged sentence, he would leave his fate entirely in the hands of Judge Paige Reese Whitaker. The world held its breath. Would the judge make an example of him, or would she acknowledge the chaos of the preceding years? The sentence: a golden cage. Judge Whitaker's decision was a masterclass in judicial balancing. She sentenced Williams to 40 years, but with a massive caveat: 5 years in prison, commuted to time already served, followed by 15 years of strict probation. The remaining 20 years would be backloaded, hanging over his head like a guillotine if he violated his probation. He would go straight back to prison for 2 decades. But the freedom came with conditions that essentially dismantled the young thug lifestyle. Williams was banished from the metro Atlanta area for the first 10 years of his probation, with very few exceptions. He was ordered to stay away from known gang members and co-defendants, with the notable exceptions of his brother Unfunk and his frequent collaborator, Gunna. Perhaps most striking were the artistic restrictions. Williams was prohibited from promoting gang activity or using gang signs in his music and social media. He was ordered to return to Atlanta 4 times a year to deliver anti-gang, anti-gun presentations to the youth, turning a man once accused of being a godfather of the streets into a state-mandated cautionary tale. The last men standing. With the leader of YSL released, only a few pieces remained on the board. On the 3rd of December 2024, the jury finally delivered the last verdicts of this epic saga. Diamante Kendrick, known as Yak Gotti, was found not guilty on all counts, including the most serious murder charges. For Kendrick, it was a total vindication after years of incarceration. Shannon Stillwell, SB, however, did not walk away completely clean. While cleared of several major charges, he was convicted of being a felon in possession of a firearm and sentenced to 10 years, though much of that was credited as time served or suspended to probation. As the jury was officially dismissed, the longest criminal trial in Georgia history finally came to an end. The courtroom, once a theater of intense animosity and legal brilliance, fell silent. The aftermath. Was it worth it? The dust has settled on the YSL Records case, but the scars remain. For the city of Atlanta, it was the most expensive legal undertaking in its history, costing taxpayers millions and exposing deep fractures in the judicial system. For the music industry, it served as a chilling reminder of how the line between art and reality can be blurred in the eyes of the law. Jeffrey Williams walked out of jail that Halloween night, a free man, but he is a man transformed. He is no longer the untouchable titan of Buckhead. He is a man under constant surveillance, living in a self-imposed exile, tethered to the court by a 20-year threat of imprisonment. The story of YSL is a modern tragedy of ambition, loyalty, and the relentless machinery of the state. It began with a dream of escaping the projects through music and ended in a courtroom where that very music was used as a blueprint for a criminal empire. In the end, the law didn't need to prove every lyric was true. It only needed to prove that the lifestyle those lyrics celebrated had a cost. And for Jeffrey Williams, that cost was 10 years of his home, the dismantling of his slime brotherhood, and a lifetime spent looking over his shoulder. The music may continue, but the era of YSL as the world knew it is over. This is the brutal reality of the RICO shadow. Even when you win your freedom, you never truly leave the courtroom behind.